Welcome to the Accidental Experts podcast. I'm your host, Bryce Hamilton. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a child and family therapist. I have been in practice for over 15 years, and I'm also a mom of 4. So I know the challenges both professionally and personally. I'm so glad that you're here today to grow your parenting toolbox. Please come as you are and be ready to learn. My goal is to make you the accidental expert so that you can raise healthy humans. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm so glad you're with us today. So, what an important topic to be talking about today. I think no one is safe from abuse, and there are things that we can do and things that we need to know as parents to protect our kids. So, we have Melanie Sakoda, and she began a website along with her friends for survivors of abuse in the Orthodox Christian churches called Poke Grove and the Protection of the Mother of God in 1999. They have spoken up against and about abuse in a case that was mishandled by church officials, leaving their lives forever changed by the backlash. Realizing how important their mutual support was, they wanted to reach out to those who did not have that. The website was active until March 2020 when Melanie affiliated with SNAP, the Survivors Network for those abused by priests. In 2008, she led SNAP support meetings from 2009 until recently, and Melanie continues to lead independent virtual support groups and advocate for survivors, particularly Orthodox victims, and is the president of the board of directors of Coptic survivors. With that, I will welcome Melanie.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yes. Okay. So we're going to be talking about a topic that I feel like every parent should listen to, which is about recognizing that abuse can happen in with the least expected people, the people we trust most, and the people we scarily leave our children with and walk away assuming that they're going to be okay. So we're going to give parents some education on this to help us protect our kids. So thanks for doing that.
Oh, you're very welcome. Happy to do it.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us a little bit about yourself and then we'll jump into our questions.
Well, my education was as I went to law school. I have a law degree. I'm licensed to practice law in the state of California. But when my kids were born, I wanted to be a mom. That's truthfully, that's what I've always wanted to be. So I spent a lot of time at home with them.
Yeah.
And what happened was there was a predator, a sex offender. He had already had 2 convictions, who was present at our church. We found out about it just sort of accidentally, and for some reason, some people thought it was really funny. But nobody thought too much about it until a friend of mine was talking about it with her the Sunday school teacher, and she had her 5 kids in the back of their van. And they're talking about, I mean, wasn't that shocking that, this man, and he was just a layman. He didn't have any special place in the parish.
Mm-hmm.
And from the back of the car, I guess she would have been 3 or 4 then, 4-year-old probably, pipes up, he's in jail. He was my friend. We played games together. And this was a surprise to the mom and to her. She had 3 teenage sisters. And that's sort of how it started, was that, and we came to find out that this man he'd already been convicted twice. He had 1 parole revocation where he was abusing more kids while he was on parole. And there were people at the parish who we believe knew about it, and there was no warning. There was no, he was not supervised while he was on the premises. And we believe that there were at least 11 kids hurt. We know that one of the 11 was a visitor, so it's possible that there are victims, untold victims. So we went to first the priest, who was who was useless, and then we went to the bishop, and the bishop was how do I want to say it? He was very hostile.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually we all ended up leaving because there was, all the parents in the parish ended up leaving because it just wasn't being handled properly. And that sort of started it. And then, as we did more research on this particular person, and in he I guess I should back up a little. In 1990, he was arrested for abusing a child at his place of work, and he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. And in 1999, he was sentenced to 15 years, but usually you can, at least at that point in time, and in California, you could count on them only serving half of their sentence unless they really messed up.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was due to be released, but the prosecutor who had put him in the prison for the last time, she filed a petition for a civil commitment to have him declared to be a sexually violent predator. And he was found to be a sexually violent predator, and he's been in a locked mental facility since then.
Good.
So, yeah, and it's like someone told me years later that the place where he is for a locked facility. It's very nice, and it's like, I don't care. They could lock him in the Taj Mahal just as long as they don't let him near children, because this man was not a groomer. This man was 10 minutes alone with the child, and that child was molested.
Wow.
And he had, as I said, he abused both of his own two children. He abused, he had the convictions. He had the parole revocation where there was more victims. And one of the chilling things that we have a transcript of his sentencing hearing in the last time, and he was really angry that the judge had sentenced him to 15 years. And he's going on and on about how, well, gee, judge, it's only, three offenses. He counted his two convictions and the parole revocations over, 20 years or whatever. I think the parole records showed that he admitted to abusing his first child when he was 9 years old. So, and then he says, he sort of backed down and he said, well, I'm not going to say that if I get out that I won't hurt any more children. I'm a pedophile. It's what I do. Like it was a vocation. And it was the most, and I'm just reading it. I didn't hear, we didn't hear him say it. And I thought, that's the most chilling thing I think I've ever heard. This is what he does. And that's what people need to recognize, is these people, there's something wrong with them. And it's not just, in my view, it's not that they're sexually attracted to children. It's that, because it's not about sex, it's about power and control. They get off, I guess in my mind, they're more likely to be, sociopaths or, something like that, that they have no empathy. And it makes them feel powerful to see the terror in their victims' faces. So they keep on doing it.
Yuck. But that only happens in California, right? It doesn't happen anywhere else.
The halftime, I don't know. The laws vary from state to state.
Sure.
And they change. So I don't know, like your husband might know what it might be in I don't know if you're in Missouri or Kansas, but but it is true that a lot of times when they're sentenced to, a number of years, they don't have that, they have to serve all of that, unless that's what the judge orders. They don't have to serve all of that time. And, if the prisons are overcrowded, or, if they've been good in prison, then they get out earlier.
Yeah.
And, at least the ones that go to prison, and hopefully they're also required to register as sex offenders, so that it sort of, it means that they're less likely um, to be put in positions of supervision with children anymore.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
they could still be in your neighborhood, you know,
Yeah.
if you don't check to see, whether there's a registered sex offender in your neighborhood,
Yeah.
they could still be near you. And just because, they could be the nice neighborhood man or woman who hands out candy or
Mhm.
um,
Yeah. Could be anyone.
could be anyone.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But I do think it's more important that we get more and more of these people convicted,
Mhm.
and hopefully they're either in prison or they're someplace like the abuser from our church was, in a locked mental facility. And as long as they don't have access to kids anymore,
Yeah.
because these people are dangerous. And I remember sitting in my daughter's gymnastics class, and this woman was sitting next to me, and she was talking about that she didn't worry so much, now that her daughter could talk, that who was watching her or anything. And I'm sitting there thinking, are you are you nuts?
Yeah.
It's like number one mistake, your kid could be hurt, and to tell you they've already been hurt, which
Mhm.
means that they're going to have some damage, and these are damages that tend to last a whole lifetime. I
Yeah.
mean, not
Yeah.
that your kid can't go on to have a happy life,
Sure.
but the consequences are going to be lifelong.
Yes.
And the second mistake is you don't know that they're going to tell you about it.
Mhm.
Not a lot of kids don't, because they either don't understand. Particularly really young kids may have no clue as to, they know they don't like it, but they don't know
Mhm.
why. They don't have the words to tell you what's wrong.
Mhm.
But you may not know. I mean, I
Mhm.
think some of the studies have shown that the average age for a person to come forward is from 50 to 70.
Yeah.
So, you may never know that your child
Mhm.
was hurt.
Yeah.
Even
At
if
a time where you could do something about it.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
protect other kids, or
Yep.
and then some of the kids feel, because as I said, I mostly work with adults who were abused as children, and most of them feel guilty. If I had said something, then the ones that came after me wouldn't have been hurt. But it's like
Mm.
it's not uh, it's not I kind of assume it's not your responsibility. Chances are, and I mostly also work with abuse victims who were abused in churches. Chances are the church already knew,
Mm.
and yes, it would have been nice, but a lot of kids do come forward and they're not believed. Their parents
Yep.
don't believe them, or even if their parents believe them and they go to the church and the church doesn't believe them, and nothing is done.
Mhm.
Because these are, I mean, maybe also the the fault of shows like CSI. These are cases where there's not going to be necessarily forensic evidence. There's
Yeah.
not going to be witnesses even. It's going
Mhm.
to be, you know, the child's word against the adult's word.
Mhm.
And if you have someone who's a priest, what chance does the child have? And I know in most of the churches, if it's the word of the priest against one, either a child or an adult coming forward, the priest wins.
Mm.
So, and
Yeah.
I don't know that that's a sensible. It's not a sensible solution, because chances are that it's the child or the adult who was abused as a child. They're the ones that are telling the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. I think oftentimes people will say or have this mentality of like it's not going to happen in our community or at our school or at our church. From your experience, why do you think that belief system is incorrect, but also potentially dangerous? Because I think what I've realized is, abuse can happen in what is considered a safe environment.
Yeah, well, I think that people do it. I think that's a way of protect. I really think it's partially a way of protecting yourself.
Hmm.
that if you think it's not going to happen, then you can relax, And I think for churches in particular, churches, there's a woman, and I meant to look up her name before I got on this call with you, and I forgot. I think it's either Anne or Anna Salter. And she says that these predators are attracted to churches because they know that everyone has their guard down. Most people think, and I'm guilty of having thought this too, that you think everyone's there for the same reason that you are.
Yeah.
Or, to worship God. And so you feel this camaraderie, like these people are safe. If someone came up to you in the park and wanted to take your kids for an ice cream, you're going like, I don't think so, bud.
Yeah.
But if one of your fellow parishioners comes up and wants to take your kid for ice cream, you might not even think twice about it.
Yeah.
But as I said, the fact of the matter is that predators are everywhere, and that they are particularly fond of places where they have positions of trust.
Yep.
And churches are one of the best places, probably. Schools are up there too, but particularly churches, because don't judge. And it's, when you talk about your gut feeling, what is that? That's a judgment. So anyways, but I think you should always feel like this is everywhere, and you should always be on your toes. You should be looking at what's going on. You should be looking, maybe it's not even your child, because some of the the man that was at our parish was a machine. But some of the other ones, they will pick victims so that you have kids that can say, well, gee, he never did anything like that to me. Yep. And so you need to be watching, is he paying more attention to the single mom's child, or maybe a kid that has learning disabilities or something like that, that is grateful for the extra attention. And it, usually in a grooming situation, that was what happens. Is it starts off, they make the kid feel good and important, and then it just sort of escalates. It's like, I think one of the more famous Catholic sex abuse victims, Phil Saviano, said that, it was like, okay, so he showed me this porn. And so I felt kind of, it's sort of like, then I'm a co-conspirator with it, because I didn't say anything and he showed it to me. So the next time when he wants something more, you feel you can't say no. And I think that's a hard thing for kids it's a hard thing for parents to understand. It's a hard thing for kids, but I think the most you can do is say, even if you said yes before, if you want to change your mind and say no, that's your prerogative.
Yeah. Like even in the midst of doing something, you can say no, right? And also by not saying yes, you're not consenting. I think kids understanding what consent is, and that like you can't consent to somebody who has power over you, right? Yeah. So if it's like a teacher or a priest or
and if you're a minor, I like to use the word child, because I think, I guess especially as I've gotten older, even teenagers are kids to me. But if you're a child, you can't consent to those things. So, and if an adult wants you to do it, there's something wrong with that adult.
Yeah.
And I know there are sometimes exceptions in the law, like for kids, like say if a high school senior starts having sex with a high school freshman, that's not necessarily a crime, although it can be, depending on the state. But if it's the 32-year-old, high school teacher, that's having sex with even a high school senior.
Yeah.
If, that's against the law. And I think in some states it's even against the law, even if the senior is 18.
And it should be, because there's still a position of power. It doesn't matter when I turn 18, that does not change that power differential.
Yeah, no, it
Yeah.
absolutely doesn't.
Yeah.
But, as I said, I think you start with education,
Mm-hmm.
educating educating your children. And I mean, yes, it's not comfortable, and for some parents, it's more uncomfortable than others.
Mm-hmm.
My mother was one that she would never really talk about anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think there's a way. There's books that can help you. A friend of mine wrote one of the best books I've seen on the subject. It's called The Well-Armored Child by Joelle Castix. And it gives you ideas, her book in particular gives you ideas of how to approach it at each different age, from, um, just talking to high school,
Yeah.
and the idea that, with younger kids, you can start, there's books that are helpful. I'm a reader, so I'm sorry if I talk about books too,
Love
but,
books. Yeah.
but, that you can, the places that are covered by your bathing suit. If someone's touching you there, other than, I mean, you can, and if you're talking to your children, you can say, well, a doctor might touch you there,
Mm-hmm.
under certain circumstances, or, for little kids, it's really hard. I mean, we change their diapers, we give them
Mm-hmm.
baths. But it's like, and one of the things I liked was, but if it makes you feel yucky,
Mm-hmm.
you need to tell me. And, you need to tell me who's making you feel yucky. And, and then you need to sort of, as a parent, then you need to question, because it could be, um, I know, one of my daughter's friends that was abused in elementary school, when they found out that the elementary school teacher had been abusing the girls in his class, her mom goes, "Why didn't you tell me?" And her daughter looks at her, "I did tell you." And she's like, "What do you mean?" She goes, "I told you I didn't like it when he rubbed my back." And she said, "But you didn't tell me the mom's going, but she didn't tell me his hand was under her clothing,
Mm-hmm.
because that makes a difference." So I mean, when you're talking with kids, you sort of have to pursue that. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, well, what don't you like about him rubbing your back?"
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if maybe the kid would have never mentioned that his hands were under her clothing, because didn't it may not have been she wouldn't have realized that that was an important thing to say.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the more you talk to them about it, and um, it, just pursue it. And,
Mm-hmm.
just like if there's all of a sudden your kid doesn't want to go to school, or they don't want to go to soccer practice or ballet or whatever it is, question it. Why don't you want to go? Um,
Mm-hmm.
because because I sort of had a rule with my kids that if we paid for it, you went to all the lessons or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But if you talk to them about it, and it's, there's a good reason why they don't want to go anymore, it's like, they would have been out of there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why you have to pursue, um, when you see changes in behavior. Um,
Yeah.
you
Well, and
know,
I think it's also important to remember that, like, first of all, most abusers are not strangers. They're
yeah,
people we know and know well. And there's been some good research to say that they groom parents as much as they groom the kids, right? They are going to be the most loved of the people normally. I think the people who are, and I hate to use the word successful in this because that makes me, it feels like a supportive word, but the people who commit these crimes and have multiple victims, which I think on average, each perpetrator has about 67 victims, I think is what I looked up in terms of research. A lot, right? So it's not just a one-time incident thing, but you don't know that. It's not like they come with like a list of all the people that they've abused. And so they are a well-oiled machine. They know this is their craft, just like criminals, like people who steal things are going to be good at it. Ideally, they don't get caught. That's the
Yeah.
same thing with this too, is that their patterns of behaviors that they do. But I think, you were talking about the priest showing pornography. That's probably not even the first thing that happened. It's
It's probably
this
alcohol.
very, yeah, it's like a very slow process. So any sexual contact, that's the end, right? Or the goal of the behavior. But there's a lot of a process that happens to just talking about inappropriate things or making them feel special, getting time by themselves. So the abuse doesn't necessarily start right away,
Yeah.
but the behaviors, the intention that person has behind their actions are to get them away, isolated, right? And connected to them so that they're reliant on them for some type of support or feedback or good feeling. And of course, we all want to be flattered. Like I love it when I get a compliment or somebody says I look nice or whatever, right? Like that feels good, and it feels good for kids too.
Yeah.
And so it starts from a place of something that we would all like, and my parents like them or whatever, like, that we can trust them because they're my softball coach.
Yeah. Or, they're my priest, and my parents
Yeah.
are so delighted when he comes over for dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about it sometimes. I've had, I don't know how many different people say, then the priest would ask, oh, well, can I hear your prayer? I'll supervise their prayers as they're going to bed.
Oh, goodness
And
gracious.
I'm like, no,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. I mean, maybe, okay, if I'm in the room,
Sure.
watching what's going on, but you're going up there with to my
Mm-mm.
kid's bedroom by yourself? No, I don't
No,
think so.
no, no.
Uh,
Well, and that leads to this like gut feeling, right? Like I think a lot of times, before we started this interview, I was telling you about a situation that had happened at my kid's school, and that I was feeling uncomfortable with
yeah,
that. I had this gut feeling and no proof. And a lot of times we want to talk ourselves out of it. We don't want, like, we don't want it to be true,
no.
but like we're just like, oh, hey, I don't have any evidence. Like I can't prove that this happened. I just don't feel good about it. What do you say to parents with that struggle?
Well, I think the best, again, as I said, I'm a book person, is The Gift of Fear by
Yeah.
Gavin DeBeeker. Is a great book to sort of understand that. It's like, when your gut's saying something, it's picked up on something that maybe
Hmm.
your conscious mind hasn't, but you should pay attention to it. Doesn't mean, I mean, you don't even have to, report at that point in time, but maybe you say, okay, I'm not going to let little Johnny, um, you know, go with him, to get my example before, to get an ice cream,
Hmm.
because I'm not comfortable with that.
Hmm.
And you can just, I mean, truthfully, if someone came up to you and as I said, in the park and made a kind of request that was making you uncomfortable, you would have no problem of just
Hmm.
saying, take a hike.
Yeah.
When it's someone that or that, particularly, if it's a teacher or a priest, someone that's in a position that you think they've been trusted, hopefully they should have had like background checks, so not that background checks can show up someone who's never had a conviction,
Yes.
but you think, okay, this person is safe. But it's like if your gut's saying no, then you don't have to be impolite or rude, but you can just say, "Oh, not today. I think, he's already had too much sugar today," or,
Hmm.
you can make, of course, then your kids goes, "What are you talking about, mom?" No.
Hmm. Hmm.
But, you can be polite, but you can still listen to your gut. And then once your gut's sort of been uh, triggered, then you
Hmm.
start looking for other red flags.
Yeah.
Maybe you talk to, other parents. Does, uh, Father so and so, has he asked to be alone with, to have to go on a camping trip, right? And
Mm-hmm.
particularly, I think in the situation where there's a single mother, she may be delighted that a man is
Mm-hmm.
taking interest, a trusted man, not just any
Mm-hmm.
man, a trusted man
Mm-hmm.
is taking interest in her children. But if your gut's saying, I don't think that's a good idea, you should listen to your gut.
Yeah.
Maybe, and not to say that your gut can't sometimes be wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think it's always worthwhile to listen to it because, as I talked about with the mother in my daughter's gym class, once the child is hurt, they're hurt.
Mm-hmm.
It's you can't erase it.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's just one time, I mean, depending, some kids, even that one time, and it's enough to have devastating consequences in their life.
Yes. Yes. Totally. Yeah.
So, pay attention.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think also you don't have to let your kid do something that you don't feel good with,
Yeah.
right? So if
They may hate you, but hey.
yes, that's okay. Yeah. I mean, and I think we can explain, like, my job is to keep you safe. And this is the feeling that I was having, like, just an unsure feeling. And so I'm going to go with you. Yeah, we can go get ice cream, but I'm going to go with you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let you be by yourself, right? Or
I mean, you could even say, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea. I'm coming
let's
too."
all go.
Yeah,
Yes,
let's
right?
go.
So I think, you know, eh, feel free to say no.
Yeah.
Our kids definitely need to hear no, and we have no obligation to any other person to say yes. We
No.
should only say yes when we want to say yes.
Yeah. And it especially because it's sort of getting back to something that we touched on earlier, you can't tell by looking at them or by what their job is that
Mhm.
they are a safe person.
Yep. Or
You
unsafe.
Or unsafe. You just have, it could be that the homeless guy in the park is the safest person you could want to meet.
Yeah.
And the priest at the church
The most
is a
unsafe.
is a prolific abuser of children.
Mhm.
So you can't tell by looking,
Mhm.
but I do think that we all have our instinct. I remember, and this is kind of funny. My mother was an abuse survivor, and she was a, a little paranoid, like say, when I was growing up.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
here I am. I'm in kindergarten, and we're riding the bus to school, and the bus driver had this thing about this one little girl on the bus. Now, what he had told all of us kids, that she reminded him of his daughter or his granddaughter or something like this. He was an
Mhm.
old man. And so when she came on the bus and when she left on the bus, he would give her this big kiss on the lips. And um, I think most of the kids were jealous that was only this one little girl that got the kisses from the bus driver.
Mhm.
He was, I mean, my memory of him is he was a really nice man, really nice
Mhm.
bus driver. And and then eventually, I guess someone reported him, and I'm sure it was my mother after I told her about the kisses.
Mhm.
And my mother reported him, and the school didn't remove him; they kept him as a bus driver. But there were no more. There
No
was
more kisses.
no more kisses. Which I mean, sometimes I'm thinking, well, if he was maybe that meant that it was really what he said, that she reminded him of someone that he really loved, but it was inappropriate and
Yeah.
he stopped, and we rode the
Mhm.
rest of the year on his bus without incidents.
Mhm.
But
Well, and we don't know what else is happening, right? I think
no,
you mentioned before our interview that, like, people will say, like, "Oh my gosh, they're the nicest person," but to that child, they
yeah,
might be totally different, right? That they could be nice, but then also could be mean, or it could vary on circumstance. Like, there's different perspectives that different people might have.
well, and I mean, I don't really remember now thinking about it. Was the little girl's body language saying she was uncomfortable with it or
Hmm.
she was comfortable with it? Um, I mean, my sort of vague recollection was that she didn't particularly like it,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think she liked particularly being singled out.
Mm-hmm.
But, and that's the kind of things, if your child mentions something like that to you, then you should be talking to the school or, talking to the other parents on the bus. What do you think about the bus driver?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Have you heard about this? What does your kid say? Yeah. Because there's a lot of times that kids don't tell the things, right? Like even things that are non-sexual in nature, but where it's like one friend and another friend got into a fight or somebody pushed somebody and it's like, oh, how did that go? Or like, I heard this happened. Is everybody okay? Right. And they're like, wait, what? Like what happened? And it's, so I think, and it's important for us to be a community around this.
yeah, and there's that old saying that it takes a community to raise a child, but I think it takes a community to protect children.
Yes. Yes.
With everyone paying attention and everyone knowing what normal behavior should look like and what isn't normal behavior. And I mean, there are cultural differences too.
Sure.
I know that I was raised in an Eastern European family, and kisses were on the lips.
Mm-hmm.
Even between men. So I wouldn't think too much of it. That there
Sure.
was someone kissing this little girl on the lips, but and that's okay. You can recognize those differences. But if it's making you uncomfortable, then you need to say something about it.
Mm-hmm.
If your child is being made uncomfortable for something, like I said, my daughter's friend said she told her mom she didn't like the way the teacher was rubbing her back. And it's like, I mean, and to my mind, of course, thinking about all that I know, it's like, why is he rubbing her back?
Mm-hmm.
Is he doing it all the time, or is it, was she crying, or, if you're comforting a child, there may be, differences between, is this an everyday occurrence? Because if it's an everyday occurrence, it's weird.
Yeah.
Why there's no reason why a teacher needs to rub a third grader's back.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I also think, I mean, in my practice, I don't just hug kids. I don't rub their back. I'm not touching them, right? Like, I think if there's something like a kid's crying, I might say, could I give you a hug? And I always say, it's okay if you say no.
Yeah.
I just would like to know if that would be okay to comfort you in that way. And I am so proud of kids who say no. I mean, not that the ones that say yes, I'm like not proud of, but I'm like, I'm glad you let me know that you did not want that.
Yeah.
Your voice matters, right? Like, I'm not going to hug you if you don't want to hug. Would you like a high five? Or, I can do
Can I
nothing,
do
right? Like,
something else for you?
yes. Is there something else I could do? But I think, the thing that I would encourage parents to remember is by reporting something, it doesn't mean that that person like burns to flames. Like you're not, you're just giving the information to say, this thing happened. It made my son or daughter feel uncomfortable, or they reported this thing happening in their class, or I saw this thing happen and it made me feel uncomfortable. Yes, right? That you don't have to have the evidence,
No.
right? And so if there's no evidence to be had, nothing happens,
Yeah.
right? And so I think, not that we need to be like reporting stuff that we're not feeling or kids aren't saying, but I think the thing is that kids don't make these things up. When it makes them feel uncomfortable, we want their voice to be heard, because maybe this is just a matter of a nice teacher rubbing their back, but for them to say like, I don't like that, or I don't want you to do that, they should be allowed to do that and should do that.
Yeah, they should, or just like, I know, as I said, I came from this Eastern European family, and I had one cousin who would always refuse to give people kisses, right?
Yeah.
Very, and I, re- I remember, this is terrible. I shouldn't tell you this, but so some of the uncles decided that they would figure out how they could get this little girl to give them a kiss, and they started giving her $1. And and the aunts found out about it, and they're going, no, 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 no. If she doesn't want to kiss you, she doesn't want to kiss you, and you don't bribe her
Mhm.
That's a little, I mean, that's really inappropriate.
Yeah.
But I think especially, in my generation, it was very common. Give Aunt Ruth a kiss, give Uncle
Mhm.
Tommy a kiss,
Yeah.
and you were expected to do it.
Yeah.
Even if like for me, I wasn't raised near where all my aunts and uncles lived. My father was in the military. Even though I may have never met this woman in my memory, and I think it's important now to give kids the language to say no and to
Mhm.
support them. It's like, well, can you give Aunt June a high five?
Mhm.
Like what you're saying. Is there
Yeah. Yeah.
something you can do? Or, maybe you'll give her a hug later.
Yeah.
You get to know her a little bit.
Mhm.
But I think we give kids the ability to say no to things like that. And we also, the other thing and I love this is what one of my daughters, the children of one of her friends, it's like, and you don't keep secrets.
Mhm.
We can, there can be surprises.
Mhm.
Like maybe you don't tell mommy what daddy's getting her for her birthday or
Mhm.
Christmas. That's a surprise. But if someone tells you not to tell mommy and daddy about something, that's a red flag. I mean, I
Mhm.
don't know, whatever you say to kids, it's like, no, you don't keep secrets from mommy and
Mhm.
daddy. You can keep a
Yeah.
surprise from them. You don't keep secrets, and
Yeah.
you give them tools to have autonomy. And then you also recognize that, as I said, the abuser at our parish was not a groomer.
Mhm.
To realize that they're little, and the kids at the parish that were abused were all little too.
Mhm.
They could be overpowered,
Oh,
and
sure. Yeah.
that's, but you should still say something,
Mhm.
you know.
Well,
And
because it's not something our kids just randomly say.
yeah,
They normally are honest. Like they don't have a reason to be deceitful for the most part, right? And I think my experience has been that when kids have reported abuse, it's all accurate.
yeah,
They're not making it up. And although I may not have evidence of it, it still happened.
yeah. And I mean, we should listen to our children, and we should. The other thing, as I said, I mostly work with um, um, religious abuse, and a lot of times my specialty was abuse in the Orthodox Christian churches. And a lot of times you'll hear people saying, "Oh, well, we don't have the problems that the Catholics do because our priests are married or can be married."
Mhm.
And it's like, no, but it's like, that's if abuse was about sex, but it's about
Mhm.
power and control. So, you're wrong on that count. But you
Mhm.
also have to remember that if you're looking at child sex abuse in general, most of the abuse is committed by adult men in relationships with adult women. You
Yeah.
know, the fathers, stepfathers,
Mhm.
boyfriends,
Uncle. Yeah.
uncle, so it doesn't mean they're safe. It
Mhm.
just, in fact, one of the things that we've thought about is it may give them actually more access, particularly
Mhm.
to girls, because if the priest has a daughter, oh, why don't you come spend the night with my
Mhm.
daughter? Obviously, if a Catholic priest wants your daughter to spend the night with him, you're going, I don't think so, Father. And
Mhm.
what's up with that? But for a priest that has kids of his own,
Mhm.
one of the and Orthodox abuse is not as well known as abuse in the Catholic churches, but one of the big cases out of Dallas, um, one of the kids that was abused, he was a friend of the priest's son, and they were going trick or treating, and they met at the priest's house before they went trick or treating, and he was abused there. So I mean, I was gonna, and it makes you sound kind of paranoid, but basically, you don't trust anyone. I mean, you can go with your gut feeling. If your gut's telling you that this person is trustworthy, I guess
Mhm.
that's okay to go with that too. But if your gut's telling you that something's wrong, or if your kid
Mhm.
comes and tells you that something happened, then you need to become all mama or papa bear.
Yeah.
And, I, and I think it's important to know what to say when they do tell you that something.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I th- and I think the best thing you can say is the first thing you should always say is that you believe them.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they're 3 or 53.
Mm-hmm.
I believe you. What can I do to, I mean, obviously you don't ask a 3-year-old, what can I do to help you sort of make the decisions yourself. But
Mm-hmm.
that's basically what you do. You decide what to do. And if your kid tells you that they've been abused, you need to get them help. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I know that our the medical system in our country doesn't make it easy to get psychological help, but it's out there, and
Mm-hmm.
you can find it. And usually, if you can't, there are probably people that you can ask as to how to go about this. But you get them help because that early intervention can be really important. It can get them started on changing the way they think about what happened.
Mm-hmm.
It was their fault. It was something that they did wrong. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I just had just this week, I had a man tell me that he was in an airport and he saw a priest who was the same height as the priest that abused him. And all of a sudden it dawned on him, oh my God, I was so small.
Mm-hmm.
And he had never, I mean, and it's kind of funny that, what it is that will make you think about those kind of things. And,
Mm-hmm.
and he was quite upset. He said, well, great, because that means that you can let go a part of you that felt that you should have, been able to, a lot of times, particularly boys, well, why didn't you fight him off? And it's like, it doesn't always work. Or, people forget that there's fight and flight, but there's also freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And a
And
lot,
fun. There's fun where you do something you don't want to do just because you think it's going to get over faster. That doesn't mean that you're complying or
yeah,
wanting to do it. That, I mean, most people that have experienced abuse, that's something that happens, right? They might freeze, but they might not say anything because they just don't know how.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they can even be, I've had even adults that froze when
Mm-hmm.
confronted by a clergy abuser, because it's like that's not what you see them as. You see them
Mm-hmm.
as, a representative of God, not as
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, someone who doesn't care whether you want
Mm-hmm.
them to do that or not.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Can you talk about what are the symptoms or behaviorally, emotionally, physically that might change in a kid? Because sometimes nothing, right? Like you might not notice anything, but then sometimes there are symptoms that kids might present as
yeah,
or with that might indicate, okay, this might need be something that I kind of like lean into or find out more about this.
yeah. I mean, well, one of the things I think is not wanting to go someplace or to be with
Mm-hmm.
someone that they've previously not had a problem with.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, that's for exploring, because it could be that there's some other
It could
benign,
be another kid, right? That they don't want to be with, or yeah, it could be, yeah, something random. Yeah.
but and that's the thing. Look for changes in behavior. A lot of times, I know the adult survivors that I work with, and they'll tell their parents, as they're older, and
Mm-hmm.
their mom will go, I knew, it's like you changed that year
Mm-hmm.
when you had father so and so for, in your class or whatever. And so you look for changes in behavior. I mean, kids change, kids do change, but
Sure.
this is kind of like abrupt. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
like maybe a little girl not who always liked to get dressed up in her fancy dresses for church all of a sudden doesn't want to,
Mm-hmm.
or and sometimes physical symptoms too. Um, the perhaps And especially when kids are raped, there may be bleeding,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe you find a pair of bloody underpants in the wash, and you need to think to yourself, okay, that's not normal.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to explore this further. Like, where were they before this? What
Mm-hmm.
might have happened to them? Or even just, I think, one of the symptoms that I remember was a little girl had a rash on her private parts, and it would go away and it would come back, and and then when they found out that there was the abuse situation, it's like, oh my God.
Mm-hmm.
So just I mean, and the first thing you need to know your kids so that you can see these
Mm-hmm.
changes in, particularly for younger kids. I mean, I think it's harder with teenagers because, um, you know, teenagers get moody and what have you. But like with younger kids, I know that the um, sometimes showing a knowledge about sexual behavior that's something that they wouldn't normally know.
Mm-hmm.
Like I
Sure.
remember one of the cases where the parents told the psychiatrist that the kids had been chasing each other with toothbrushes, threatening to stick, and during bath time, threatening each other with their toothbrushes, saying, "I'm going to stick this up your butt." And she goes, "That's not normal behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Toothbrushes go in your mouth.
Mm-hmm.
If someone is thinking, and people, poop comes out your butt.
Mm-hmm.
If a kid is talking about putting something up their butt, you know, you, you should be thinking, where is that coming from?
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean to be gross, but
Yeah.
you have to, you want to be sort of very proactive in this, because as I said, uh, you don't want them to be harmed at all, and
Mm-hmm.
they have been harmed. You want to stop it as soon as possible and get them
Yeah.
help,
Yeah.
because it changes.
Mm-hmm.
It changes people.
Yeah. Well, and I think some of the other things that you didn't mention, there's a very long list, and we can include links to websites that have more symptomology, but like bedwetting when they've already learned how to go
Nightmare.
through nights. Yeah. Nightmares, sometimes sleepwalking. It's all that it's a different behavior, right? Like your kid has never been potty trained at night and always has nighttime wetting. That doesn't mean anything necessarily, right? Like that could just be a function of we have not gain that control, but just noticing that, or there's
Maybe
something else that's
never having needed a nightlight before, and all of a sudden
mhm.
a nightlight. You
Yeah.
know, so you're looking for, and they could be really subtle changes, but you're
Hmm.
looking for changes in your kid's behavior. You have to know your kid well enough to know what's
Hmm.
normal for them,
Yeah.
um, and um, and then you look for the changes, and then you explore.
Yeah.
Gee, why do you all of a sudden want a nightlight? You
Hmm.
know, why do you think? I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't ask why you think you're wetting the bed,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you know,
Like I've noticed that's changed.
yeah,
We were having dry nights. Has anything changed? Right? Like anything that has happened, or has school been? How's church activities been? Right? Like how's your coach? Right? Like I mean, you're not giving them this thing. I mean, to say like, did this person do this to you?
no,
Right?
it's
Like leading them on that, but it's more open ended of and you could
or
also
can you tell me more about that?
yes.
You
Yep.
know,
Yeah.
you said you didn't want to go to um, church anymore. Can you tell me about why you don't want to go to church? And then you have to be. I mean, one of the kids at our church, his mom asked him why had told her that he didn't want to go to church anymore,
Hmm.
and she said, "Why not?" He goes, "Because I can't talk in a loud voice." And I mean, it's like, well, yeah, yeah. can't talk in a
Yes.
loud voice.
Yes.
But when
Yes.
she found out about the abuse, and she said, okay, I'm sorry that happened. We're going to get you help now. And the little boy said, and can I talk in a loud voice?
Mm.
So it meant something to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, and as a parent, you can miss things,
Yeah, totally.
but you do your best,
Mm-hmm.
you keep your gut in gear and you keep the lines of communication open. You give kids a vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, I do remember, and we had tried to do this, and um, so we used the word vagina with my daughter when she
Mm-hmm.
was really little, and then my friend comes over and she goes, "I have pajamas and Michael has a penis." It's like, oh, close.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
You give them a vocabulary,
Mm-hmm.
you let them know what's okay and not, and let them
Mm-hmm.
know that they should always feel comfortable coming to you and
Mm-hmm.
telling you about something that bothers them.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
you
Something
just,
that feels yucky or uncomfortable. Yes.
yeah,
Absolutely.
and that's the best we can do. And then if
Mm-hmm.
something unfortunate does happen, then you're there for them. You tell
Yeah.
them, believe them, you're going to get them help,
Mm-hmm.
and even if it's, I know a lot of times, particularly people that are really religious will write to me and say, well, this happened in my church. What should I do? It's like, leave. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Why would you stay in a church where this is happening? If
Mm-hmm.
you want your kid to be comfortable, and I mean, that's hard,
Yeah.
especially
Sure.
if you're really involved with your community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you want to put your sort of your money where your mouth is. And if they've been hurt at that church, then that's it, because
Yeah.
you won't tolerate them being hurt,
Yeah.
particularly if the abuser is still there. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's, and um, you make a complaint. If there's a crime that's taken place, you report it,
Yes. To the
and
police. Yeah.
to the police. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And my recommendation, although most of the people that come to me first don't listen, is you go to the police before you go to the church, because the church is
Mm-hmm.
going to say, "Oh, well, we'll take care of it."
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And
Every organization I've ever known of, they take care of it, which also means nothing. I
yeah,
don't trust anything.
yeah,
I just can't.
and I mean, even sometimes, not so much the police, but the DAs if it's just
Mm-hmm.
one child that's come forward, some of them don't want to prosecute.
Mm-hmm.
Because as I said, you're looking at cases where there's no evidence, there's no witnesses. The most you have, although as I point out to some people, well, the mom saying that, yeah, the kid's behavior changed the first time he was alone with father so and so, that is evidence.
Mm-hmm.
But these are hard cases to prosecute. But
Sure.
and I think it's too bad. I remember reading an article about a prosecutor in New York, and she was just gung ho, that these cases be taken care of. And so she prosecuted all of them, whether it was one kid or five kids.
Mm-hmm.
And her success rate, like, just went up through the roof. So I think you want to have, that maybe that's education too for the prosecutors. They
Mm-hmm.
should be prosecuting these cases,
Yes.
even if they may not win all of them.
Well, because one is too many. Like, that's the truth. One is too many. We should have zero. We should not have this issue. So we can't let perpetrators think that there's safe havens for them to get away with this behavior. We want them to be scared of getting caught.
We want them to control to be scared, so that perhaps they'll control their own behavior.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what the side of that is, right? Like, jail may be the only place to control that, or some type of psychiatric hospital. But for sure, kids should be prioritized, and we shouldn't be worried about the adults' feelings. They made choices. Kids can't make choices. And regardless of what they were wearing or not wearing, or saying or not saying, there is nothing that could make it appropriate for an adult to perpetrate on a kid.
No, there's just no reason for it. And but it happens. We need
Yeah.
to realize that it happens, and
A lot. It happens a lot.
it happens a lot.
Yeah.
I think that I mean, I've seen different statistics, but as many as 20% of kids are sexually abused before they turn 18. That is a tremendous, I mean, that's, thankfully it's not all. We don't, I mean, I suspect that it may be higher than that.
I think it's probably way higher, probably double,
But
right? Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, but here is this sizable chunk of little children, older children that have been hurt. And what do we spend on prevention? What do we spend on, figuring out what to do with the kids when they're, treatments for children, maybe even treatments for the adults. I mean, I don't know that there's anything particularly, you know, if it's a sociopath, but, let's put some money there. The amount of money that's spent on the small percentage of kids who get childhood cancer just dwarfs what is spent on what is a huge, huge problem.
National. Yeah.
It's an epidemic. And I mean, you want to talk about, as I said, how many kids get cancer versus how many kids are going to be sexually abused. I know it's something that people don't want to look at. They don't like to think about it. And I know one of the things that we discovered at our parish was that people want to blame the parents, because if it's something that the parents did, then it can't happen to your kid because you're not going to do that. But you have to support one another. And if someone's telling you that they think their child was abused, you need to listen to them too. Maybe, ask your kid, was it, just, well, what do you, and maybe even, more open-ended questions. Well, what do you think about Mr. BJ? And listen then to what they're saying, or maybe what they're not saying.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it is hard work to be in this position as a parent, but we have to do it. What do you think is, okay, so talking to kids, a lot of times parents are super uncomfortable. We kind of talked about using the correct terminology for private parts, so vagina and penis. But like, what are age appropriate ways that we can start this conversation around maybe boundaries or consent or body safety for kids?
Well, maybe one of the places to start is, as I said, the simple thing, if your kid doesn't want to give you a hug, you respect that boundary. And say, oh, I mean, you can milk it. You can say, oh, I'm really sad. You don't want to give me a hug, but you give them the autonomy to make decisions about themselves. If I don't know, if they want to stop, as I said, taking a particular class, fine. So you give them the chance to have control over their own lives. I mean, within age appropriate ways. And I think that's the start of it. And you keep the lines of communication open with them. You talk to them about things. As I said about, I told my mother about the bus driver kissing the little girl, and my mother listened to me, and that's important to do. But it's hard because kids sometimes don't see things the same way. It's like when my daughter, the kids that were abused in her 3rd grade class, the talk was all over the playground. All the little girls were talking to each other about what this teacher was doing. They were trying to figure out solutions to it.
Yeah, listening to the rumors, right? A lot of times there's truth behind that of like, what are kids talking about, to find out more about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like great, in the carpool, right? Because kids think you're invisible or something.
Yes.
You're driving the car and they're in the back seat, or I used to have a station wagon with a rumple seat, and the kids are talking. You listen to what they're saying.
Yep.
And there's no guarantees, but
Yeah.
you do your best and you keep your eyes open and
Mhm.
you tell your kids that they don't have to take it.
Mhm.
And, the only thing I think it's hard is yeah, particularly for really young kids, the size differential.
Mhm.
They could say no, and it might not mean anything because they
Yeah.
could be so I mean, even adults can be overpowered,
Sure.
but, for children, it's particularly true.
Yeah. Well, and I think, yeah, sometimes those things are going to happen where you couldn't say no, or you do say no and they don't listen or whatever it is, but to have them be able to come to you and say, this happened, right? So them understanding what consent is giving their permission willingly and enthusiastically. They want to do that. And if that's not how it is, that's not consent. And
Yeah,
that's not about, we have to give, we want our kids to wear a jacket when it's snowing, or that sometimes they have to take a bath when they don't want to. This isn't about those kind of things. This is consent about their body. And I know that, like, for us, as our kids are aging, like when they get to, school, it's like, okay, you can wash your private parts. Like, I can help you wash your hair, but I want you to wash your vagina and your bottom. And like, that's important for you to take care of. And talking about even doctors, right? Like, we imagine that everybody is there to keep us safe, but I think doctors should be asking for permission, right? Like when they might be taking a look at their penis or vagina, or maybe they're injured, right? To say, can I look, unless it's an emergency? That, like, that part of consent is good for people that we trust, because that is helping kids to understand that, like, even doctors are doing this. My parents are doing that. Like, sometimes something will be wrong with one of my kids and I'll say, do you want me to look?
yeah.
Right, in their private area, and they can say no, and I can still give them advice, like, maybe you might do this. If it doesn't get better, let me know tomorrow. And then, checking in on something.
And I mean, we have, I mean, and I think not abdicating being a parent, but giving them some control over some of and each parent may do that, make those lines drawn in different
Sure.
places.
Sure. Yeah.
But what's important is that you give your kids the idea that it's not always the adults who are in control of them.
Yeah.
They have the right to say no. They have the right to say that they don't like something. I mean,
Yep.
they can even tell the doctor, "I don't like it when you do that."
Hmm.
That's okay,
Yeah. They
you
can
know?
say no, and the doctor should listen unless it's an emergency, right? Like, I think, obviously, withstanding a medical emergency, that's a little different, but, like, otherwise we can look next time or do it a different way, or maybe it's a male child and they want a male doctor, or whatever, or vice versa, right? That would be something, but I think it's about the conversation for sure.
And, it's like, okay, you don't like getting shots,
Hmm.
and then there's a conversation about why they're important,
Hmm.
why even though it's like you don't have to like it. That is perfectly fine. I don't like
Yes.
getting shots either. What can we do to make it more comfortable? Let's ask the
Hmm.
doctor,
Yeah.
how we can make it better. But
Yeah.
yeah, you have to have your shots. Sorry about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean, I think, I had some people are more authoritarian with their kids. I wasn't particularly,
Hmm.
but I do think even the most authoritarian parents, you have to, if you want to protect your kids, you
Hmm.
have to give them some control over some parts of their life
Yep.
and teach them that it's okay to say no to adults.
Hmm.
And I mean, you can teach them, not to be bratty about it. I mean, but it is sometimes appropriate to say no. Or
Yes, of course. Yeah. Okay, so this is a question, and I didn't prepare you for this one, so sorry for throwing this out there. But a question I get a lot of is, should we let our kids do sleepovers?
I let my kids do sleepovers. Um, After we found out about the abuse at the church, um, my daughter's gymnastic instructor used to have sleepovers at the gym, and the kids were all excited because they got to be on the equipment all
Hmm.
day and everything. And after this happened, then I started to get more suspicious. And I'm like, oh my God, he's alone with the girls in the gym. I don't know. Maybe I think his assistant might have been there. I'm not sure. But anyways, and then I thought, because you can go the other way too. I think it's like, what do I feel about this person?
Mm-hmm.
And that was what I finally did. It's like, I never had a bad feeling about him. And, I never saw any indications that my kid was, there was something wrong after she came home from these sleepovers. So it's like, again, you listen to your gut. Maybe I think the most thing I would do is, I think it's really hard to let your kid go to a sleepover where you don't know the other parents.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And that may be one thing. It's like you meet the parents. Maybe you have that kid to your house first.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my mother's trick. I know I had a friend that she wouldn't let me go to their house. Although I realized as an adult, I realized it was probably because I told her that the little girl had told me that her father had in front of them, her taken kittens and smashed their face and smashed their heads in a door because he didn't want them. And so she would never let me go over to that little girl's house.
Yeah.
She was welcome to come and spend the night at our house.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think it's a thing you have to think about it. Do you feel comfortable? Does your kid feel comfortable? Does your kid want to go?
Mm-hmm.
I think probably group sleepovers are a little less, I don't know, maybe less likely for things to happen than, the one-on-one that smaller kids get. But if your kid doesn't want to go, then fine. Or if they go once and they don't want to go again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's hard to decide. And as somebody who's like actively navigating this, we have not let our kids do sleepovers except for at our house where we know that like things are safe, right? Like,
well, as I said, my mother never let me go. She let me go to two people's houses to spend the night. One was because there was no father in the house. And the other one was because he was a teacher and a former military man, and she really liked him. And those were the only two places that I ever got to spend the night.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the other times with the sleepovers, there were kids coming to my house.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a perfect system, right? Like we are just out there trying to do the best we can. I think following our gut feeling when something feels wrong, honoring that. And
honoring our kids' guts.
Yes, exactly.
Too. Maybe they can have a gut feeling that they can't tell you why they don't like Mr. So-and-so.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, you can have, Freddie come spend the night at our house.
Yeah.
You don't have to go and be by him.
Totally. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Melanie, for all of this wisdom and advice. This is such a hard topic to navigate, and we're glad to have you on our side.
Okay. Well, thank you. And if I can do anything in the future, just let me know.
Thanks again, Melanie, for your time and helping us to understand this complicated topic and giving us a piece of advice, and also helping us to understand that no one is immune and that we don't know what abusers look like in terms of what their physical appearance looks like, but that we can follow our gut and use that to guide us in helping to make the best decisions we can for our kids. With that, I will say thank you so much for your time today. Please like and subscribe to our show. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. And if you would do me a huge favor, would you send this to 5 friends? Share this episode with people because everybody needs to know about what we're looking for to help educate our community so that we can keep kids safe. With that, I will say have a great day. Some words from our legal team.
The information presented in this podcast is not intended or implied to be a substitute for appropriate professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained on or available through this podcast, is for general information purposes only. This podcast makes no representations and assumes no responsibility for the accuracy or information on or available through this podcast, and such information is subject to change without notice. You are encouraged to confirm any information obtained through this program with other sources and review all information regarding any condition or treatment with the appropriate professionals.
What we're saying is, yes, I am a real therapist, but I'm not your therapist.